It's great to come to Snapshot 2, and I'm really continuing what I was trying to say yesterday before rudely interrupted by OpenReach, who kept diminishing the signal. Just to recap very quickly, I'm interested in changes in cybercrime threat landscape, and especially the way they the offenders have become more adaptive and organized to challenge law enforcement. And I'm going to deal with some of the challenges to law enforcement today, and some of the data and some of the issues within dealing with data, particularly the data sharing paradox, which I shall explain very soon. There are some slides on the website, although I couldn't get to them myself. And there's also an article I've just published for CEPOL, the Central European Police Training Agency, or something of that ilk, which is being published. So yesterday, I was saying that my research into cybercrime is finding that the cybercrime offenders are becoming more professional than before. So for the police, that means more hard work. They're spending more and more time and effort evading law enforcement. And there are a number of different tactics that are being used at the moment to avoid the police. One of them, for instance, is the fact that their business models include obsolescence. So at the height of their attacks, they will cease business, and then they will reinvent themselves as something else. And this does not help law enforcement. They're more ruthless, as I mentioned, the triple extortion methods. In addition to encryption, they name and shame victims. They steal data, which they can resell or repurpose if the ransom isn't paid. And they also inflict victims with denial of service attacks to heat the pressure and make them pay ransoms. This high yield is encouraging cybercrime as a career. And the offenders are supported or are part of a cybercrime ecosystem, which is the new face of serious and organized crime. There are multiple actors in this area with different motivations, political, economic, pranksterish. There's no single Mr., Ms., or Mrs. Big. The offenders are incredibly adaptive, whereas the cybersecurity and law enforcement tend to be rather rule-based in their approach. Of course, I mean, a lot of this is to do with the courts. And the challenges of cybercrime for law enforcement are that cybercrime is actually a blended crime. It comprises of more than one crime itself. It's a technical crime, computer misuse crime, as well as the crime of extortion. It involves technical skills and social skills. And statistically, it's problematic because it's hard to record. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. And the ransom and the wearer are recorded as different statistics. They're different bodies of law. They fall under different policing agencies, not just within the terrestrial police, but also in terms of the sort of national police forces. And these agencies have untrusted relationships with industry, particularly the cybersecurity industry. And part of the problem is that victims pay the ransom. They don't want their victimization to become public, and they want to resolve the matter quickly themselves. And if it's not the victims, it's the people the victims employ, perhaps through the cyber insurance, which lead to this sort of private pursuit of justice. And the clash between the private and public interests often hinders the search for justice. So we need to find a way of co-owning the problem to co-produce the solution. I did mention this as part of my conclusion yesterday, but the problem is, how do you know about cybercrime? And are we okay for time? Hello?
Hello, yeah, we're okay for time. Yeah,
sorry, I thought we're
8 minutes past.
Okay, good. So the problem is that ransomware tends to be over-reported by the media. The dramatic reporting raises public expectations and distorts the problem. And this gets onto the political agenda, with the results from politicians being demanded very quickly. And I think it starts to take attention from those who are being tasked with the problem. One of the problems is that, well, on the one hand, it tends to be over-reported dramatically. On the other hand, it's largely underreported by the victims who preferred, as I mentioned before, to deal with the victimization in their own interest. To make things worse, the offenders are now publishing the victims' names, but they over-report them because the naming doesn't mean the victims have actually been affected. And this is part of the problem, because not all victims who are ransomware victims, not all ransomware victims and cybercrime victims actually are affected because they have mitigation or prevention or security processes in place. Yeah. And the problem is getting data on, and that we should be able to distinguish between general attacks, unmitigated attacks. This is where attacks where the harm, the attacks that have not been mitigated and the harm has actually occurred, but also attacks where a crime has actually occurred. And few of these are actually reported. And there are very few attacks known where an offender can be identified, other than, for instance, a ransomware group who do make a lot of efforts to hide themselves and their liabilities, for instance, by employing affiliates to use their ransomware. And one of the results for the challenges for law enforcement is that ransomware is generally under-prosecuted, which means little court experience across the criminal justice system. And I'm not even going into the jurisdictionality issue here. Policing ransomware becomes problematic when the victims and offenders are in different jurisdictions. We saw the Blackboard case recently, where there were about 1,500 victims from one particular offense. The ransomware may be big locally, but it's small locally. But local police get little experience of dealing with the crime. Although I mentioned yesterday, and I'll say again, the UK police, the NCA, seem to manage their relationship, I think, manage their relations with the local police very well. And the regional ROCUs, the regional organised crime units, seem to be working fairly well and seem to be well regarded. So just to quickly conclude, the big issues that I think is to resolve the public versus private interest problem. The data sharing paradox, which I've mentioned, and there is a paper actually with my friends in Newcastle and I have written on this, is that everybody agrees on the problem, but a lot of people, perhaps not everyone, but many people disagree on the solution. And the public and private interest clash to hinder this search for justice. Victims pay the ransom because they don't want the victimization to become public. They want to resolve the matter quickly. And cyber insurance, unfortunately, seems to be fanning the flames and encouraging the offenders by paying. And there's a general lack of trust between victims, cybersecurity and law enforcement agencies. And we need to develop certain ways of co-owning the problem. For instance, sharing data through a third party, for instance, a sectoral agency such as the UK payments method, or developing mutual shares of mutually sharing, ways of sharing mutual areas of mutual interest, sharing data, but not necessarily sensitive data. And one of the things that myself, Steve McGough, and others from the Turing Institute are trying to do is develop best practice in this area about getting a common language, getting ways of understanding what the data is and expressing what the data is, and also developing techniques, accepted techniques of sharing it. And I'll stop there. Thank you.